I think it's important to say a few words on the Supreme Court ruling regarding trans issues and how women are defined in law because it's a big issue right now, and I want to put my stance out there just for the record. I'm going to prefix this with something just to be absolutely clear where I lie. I actually do have sympathy with trans people to an extent. I sympathize with the anxiety and the loneliness many of them do feel. And I don't think that ridicule and mocking people who suffer gender dysphoria is the right way to approach this. Um, I'm not in their shoes, so I don't know what their life is like. I can only guess. But I do have sympathy with people in that position. And yes, I have known a few trans people, not well, admittedly, but I've certainly spoke to people who are trans. Um, but my instinct is that someone who is born with male genitalia simply can never be a woman. It just isn't possible biologically to change sex in that sense. You can transition and you can legally be recognized as a trans woman, but I just don't think it's right to say that someone who's born as a man can ever be a woman in the correct definition of the word. And I dislike the way the trans lobby aggressively pushes this dogma. Trans women are women. No, they're not. So let's be clear what this actually means, because the judge involved was very quick to make it clear that this wasn't a victory of one group over another. And see if I can quote that bit actually. Um, Despite the jubilation, because women's groups have been celebrating this, Lord Hodge had been careful to stress the ruling should not be seen as a triumph for one group over another, but as a simple clarification of law. He added that the Equality Act still gives trans people who are described as a vulnerable and often harassed minority specific protection, and said the judgment would not change this. So this is the cover of the Daily Mail. You're not going to be surprised at how the Daily Mail's taking that. I would say most of the press, with the probable exception of the Guardian, will be taking a positive stance on the ruling. I would have got another paper just for balance, but at that point they were mostly sold out. Um, I support women when it comes to the definition of what is a woman. It's a bit crazy that this is even a debate. Now, it's worth pointing out that Debbie Hatton, who is trans themselves, actually has a piece in this supporting the ruling. So, I would say that it would be wrong to look at the extremists and think all trans people are like that. Um, but there is unquestionably zealots in the midst. I'm going to put a link to a Sky News report on this, which showed the demonstrations by trans activists. Um, and they're not exactly helping their own case. One of them had a poster literally showing a noose and saying hang, or it was showing this noose of execute turf women or so. I forget what the exact words were, but the implication was clear. Now, the police pathetically say there's no grounds, no crime has been committed, but you could be damn sure if someone used the wrong pronoun online, there's a chance that the police would show up with uniformed officers at your door. Police really do themselves no favors these days with their double standards and with the way the policing. This ruling has been called a victory for common sense. I think it is, and this is what it stipulates in particular. I'm just going to read this out, because this summarizes it pretty well. Uh, Here, it's going to be the right segment. What does the Supreme Court rule? What does the Supreme Court rule? That the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex. The judges said the definition of sex under the Act makes clear that the concept of sex is binary. A person is either a woman or a man. What does it mean for single sex spaces? Trans women with a gender recognition certificate, GRC, can be excluded from single sex spaces if proportionate. Women's rights groups hope the ruling will ensure that women's toilets, changing rooms, and domestic abuse shelters will be used by biological women only. What is a GRC? A person can apply for a certificate to have their affirmed or acquired gender legally recognised in the UK. It requires the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, having lived in the acquired gender for at least 2 years. That's important. I'm interjecting here because I've heard of cases of teenage girls having mastectomies and later regretting it. So that caveat is very important to think that they're absolutely sure that's something they want to do. Um, for at least 2 years and an intention to live in that gender for the rest of the applicant's life. The Supreme Court ruling means GRC does not elevate trans women to the same legal level as biological women. GRCs now return to what they were created for, to allow trans people to change gender on birth certificates. What does it mean for employers? Employment experts say it will provide companies with greater clarity over single-sex basis for staff. Lara Brown of the Policy Exchange think tank said a trans woman with a GRC who is excluded from single-sex basis cannot say she is being discriminated against as a woman. She added this ruling makes it legal for any space that wants to be single-sex to exclude biological men. Are employers still at risk of claims of discrimination? Court made it clear that trans people are protected under the gender reassignment provisions in the Equality Act and can bring claims if they're discriminated against or harassed. Rob McKellar, Legal Services Director at Peninsula, said a failure to be an inclusive workplace, regardless of any protected characteristics, could result in a discrimination claim. What about competitive sports? Although this ruling did not concern sports directly, Olympian Sharon Davies welcomed it, saying it was important to define what a woman is. Is a woman with a GRC entitled to maternity leave? Experts said the ruling that only women can become pregnant means a trans man, biological woman, would be able to take maternity leave, whilst a trans woman, biological man, would not. Um, what about those who self-identify as trans? The judgment does not prevent anyone self-identifying as a gender different to the what sex they were born with, and people will still be able to adopt different pronouns as these are both social rather than legal changes. So actually, the way the trans lobby is presenting this is they're under the shoot threat. Actually, it allows a lot of provisions for them to still have rights. What it is doing is ensuring women's rights. Um, I accept that trans people are at higher risk of suicide. I accept that they face, loneliness and anxiety at this time. But they have to accept that women have rights too. A women's refuge, women's prison, women's change rooms, common sense places where women should feel that they're not subjected to biological men looking at them. Um, that's an area I just think it's common sense that women should feel protected. I hope what follows is the NHS, for example, will start to get back down to earth and not change guidelines. So, for example, they're talking about expectant people rather than expectant mothers and all this nonsense gender neutral language. Um, I welcome this, but there has to be a free speech caveat with this as well. Now, it's clear that this ruling is only about clarifying the law, it doesn't get into a lot of other realms, but there has to be free speech. It's an absolute disgrace that anyone faces losing their job or getting a police knocking on the door because the day of their belief that biology matters. Now, am I advocating that trans people be ridiculed or mocked or bullied? Absolutely not. I don't think that's particularly helpful. I don't advocate it. But, any trans person who insists that trans women are women, get over yourselves, really, because you can identify as you please. You cannot demand that the rest of society panders to what the rest of society sees as simply wrong, simply a falsehood. Uh, I'll quote Quimmy Badenoch because I agree with what she said. Um, let's see here. Tory leader Kimmy Badenoch welcomed the victory for women, but warned that Labour has bent the knee to gender ideology. Starmer's changed his stance somewhat. He used to be quite dogmatic on this, and he's come around a bit more to being on the side of women. But Kimmy Badenoch, to be fair, has always been consistent in this. She got attacked by David Tennant, the actor, who said he wished she would just disappear. Well, David Tennant, maybe it's misogynistic men like you who want to silence women for daring to say that biology matters should keep a lid on it. Um, some of the most aggressive, intolerant people I've come across have been trans lobby active, some of them trans themselves, and some of them their so-called allies. They're extremely intolerant, prone to aggression, and for all the talk about trans people feeling threatened, who is it that's holding posters talking about turf women being hanged? I haven't seen any woman advocate violence against the trans community, not once. I have seen trans activists demonstrating extreme violence towards women. Take J.K. Rowling, for instance. She's been slammed as a bigot. She's been slammed as a transphobe. You've had these pathetic groups that claim to be all about Harry Potter trying to phase the creator out of it. Um, she's been vindicated. Now, again, I don't advocate bullying or ridiculing trans people, but they do themselves no favors when they act in this obnoxious way. And if it's okay for the police knock someone's door for using the wrong pronouns, then the police should get their act together and maybe arrest some of these violent trans activists who are threatening women. You know, they can't think just because they're a minority they have a green light to behave that way. Although it is important to say this isn't every trans person. It would be wrong to say that every trans person is a misogynistic fuck because they're not. But some are. And certainly those who were protesting in London were doing themselves no favours. I think it was in London. Supreme Court, I assume that's the Supreme Court. Because this was actually a case taken out by a women's group in Scotland against the Scottish government. So, I mean, actually, I must admit, I thought that was a devolved issue, but this was the Supreme Court in England and Wales, I understand, or the Supreme Court of, yeah, I'm slightly I must admit, I thought that was a devolved issue. But regardless, it's a victory for women. Um, it's a victory for common sense. But I just hope we're not going to hear any more cases of people being arrested for using the wrong pronouns. If you're trans, I've nothing against you fundamentally. But you cannot tell me that if you were born as a man, you are a woman. I will use your preferred pronoun out of respect. You know, I'm not going to go up to a trans person and use the wrong pronoun that they're not comfortable with just to be stubborn about it. I'm not going to do that. But they cannot force me to think that if they were born with male genitalia, they're a woman. They're not a woman and they never will be. Um, Likewise, I'm a heterosexual man. I'm attracted to women. I've got a girlfriend. Um, I think it's absurd when some trans people insist that heterosexual people are attracted to them. And the way I see that, I think of the film The Crying Game. If you're familiar with the film, it's a very strange film. It's about an IRA man who ends up being attracted to the trans woman who is the girlfriend of the soldier that the IRA killed. It's a very weird film. But anyway, it's certainly a unique film. I'll give it that. But basically, initially he's disgusted and he runs out of the room in shock. But then he realizes, oh, he's actually attracted to this person. Now, this is going to be a controversial thing to say, but I'll say it. I think that any man who's attracted to a trans woman is going to be at least partly bisexual. Because, to my mind, if you're a heterosexual man and you find yourself, or you say that you're heterosexual, and you find yourself attracted to someone who once had a penis, I'm sorry, but I don't think you're entirely heterosexual, and that's fine. You could be with whoever you want. You deserve to be happy. But the reason I say that is because I think of trans men, or yeah, actually, it would be trans women who insist that lesbian women should be attracted to them. Trans women, yeah. But why would they? A lesbian woman is attracted to other women. She's not going to be attracted to someone she knows used to be a man. Um, I have some sympathy with the LGB Alliance because they're right to point out that the trans experience isn't the same. But I just think that we have to be clear that if you're, you know, if you're a heterosexual person, you're attracted to women or you're attracted to men, you're attracted to the opposite sex. I find it very bizarre, honestly, when you have a situation whereby you have a trans woman and a trans man who are then with each other and they claim, each to their own. I wish them all the happiness that they can find themselves. But what I really, really have a problem with is dogmatically forcing this on others. The vast majority don't believe it, with good cause. Um, Personally, I don't care how attractive someone is. I would never be, I just couldn't be attracted to a trans woman. She may be a good person. Say I'm using the preferred pronoun here. She may be a good person. Um, you know, they may look after themselves and maybe, aesthetically look good, but I will, in my mind, know that person once had a penis. I'm not attracted to men. But on this issue, of labeling, it's interesting that the trans lobby are often throwing around the term cisgender. Like, I love how all these cisgender men are explaining it. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say we don't like labeling and we don't like being pigeonholed into gender conformity, but then you're the ones insisting there is such a thing. I mean, some women have pointed out that actually what trans women do is they get into sort of female stereotypes of being a feminine woman, wearing dresses and makeup and all of that, and yet they'd be the first to say don't label people. So there's a lot of hypocrisy within the trans movement, but I think this is a good thing. I just hope we see far less legal cases of people being harassed by the authorities for having an opinion. Now, having said all that, I don't advocate bullying trans people. Um, I do think they should be treated with sympathy, um, for sure. One last thing I'll add to this, because it wasn't really mentioned in the court ruling, the whole idea of trans children, nonsense. I think a little boy who is effeminate, maybe he's playing with dolls, maybe he likes to wear dresses, could simply be shown signs that he's gay. I think it's irresponsible to talk about a trans child, given that legally you can't have a transition until you're 18. It's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as a trans child. There may be a child who's showing symptoms of gender dysphoria, but I don't think you can have a trans child. And people say, what if it was your child? I would show love and sympathy, and I would really try and understand what's going on there. But I would not be saying, okay, because my little boy is effeminate, then that means he should get treatment as soon as he's 18. Um, I mean, like I said, there's been teenage girls who've had mastectomies. That's a life-changing decision, and then have regretted it. Academics who've tried to do studies into people who have regretted their decisions um, have found that they haven't had funding for that. And we hear about conversion therapy, but actually, I would argue that the brainwashing is a trans lobby um, exploiting vulnerable young people and saying because you're going through some confusion, you must be trans. I think it's deeply immoral to then pressure them to get a sex change operation. That's immoral. Anyway, that's how I see it. I mean, honestly, this is the day that we're saying what is a woman is madness. A woman is an adult human female who was born as a woman. That's it. Uh, but like I say, if you're trans, I'm sure you will disagree with aspects of this video, but I hope you recognize I'm not inciting violence against you. I don't hate you. I hope you can be happy in yourselves, but just don't force dogma onto the rest of us. That's all. And respect women's spaces, respect the fact that they're there for a reason, because you can never experience pregnancy or periods or things that biological women do experience.